Do you suck at the SkiErg? Today we're going to learn how to use the SkiErg and how to improve your performance in the gym or your next Hyrox event. If you're new here, I'm Dr. Alyssa Olenick, and this is Corey Davis, one of our head coaches at the LIST Method and or my main collaborator here at TLM. Today, Corey's going to be walking me through how to use the SkiErg and improving my SkiErg technique. A little bit of background, I used to train with Corey in his gym, and it's been about 2.5 years since I've had access to a SkiErg, and we are training for our first Hyrox doubles together next year. So Corey's going to walk me through and coach me on how to use the SkiErg and give you guys tips and tricks on how to improve your SkiErg performance or even start using the SkiErg in your training. For those of you unfamiliar with it, this is a SkiErg. It is similar to that of a rower or a bike, and it is simply a piece of cardio equipment from the brand Concept 2, or there's other brands out there on the market that works very similarly, where it is resisted here at the bottom, and you simply pull on the handles to get the cardio training that you are looking for. The ski is not as popular as other forms of equipment, but it's making its rise with the popularity of CrossFit and Hyrox race training, so we want to make sure that you know how to use this piece of equipment if you see it in your gym or fits into your fitness goals. So first, I'm going to kind of get on the SkiErg here, and I'm going to pass this off to Corey, who's going to coach and walk me through how to do this and give you tips on how to apply it to your training as well.
Awesome. All right, so the first thing I would do is I would just let Alyssa set up normally. I'm going to start Alyssa with the damper up on a 10 so that she can feel some resistance and feel the weight of the machine. Over time, it might be beneficial for her to lower that damper setting down. Basically, what that means is when it's up on 10, there is more air coming in, it's gonna feel heavier, but every pull is gonna take her farther. As it lowers down, it will feel lighter and easier, but every pull doesn't take her as far. And so you need to find out where you line up on that spectrum of, I'm gonna do better with a lighter resistance, pulling more easily, or I'm gonna do better with a harder resistance where it's more challenging to pull, but every pull takes me farther. Because Alyssa is one, really strong, and two, just getting back into it, I'm gonna have her start up on a higher damper so that she can feel the weight, and then over time we can drop it down as we try to find the right spot for her. So Alyssa's going to step onto the machine. She is going to get her feet about right there. If she was shorter, I would have her move a little bit closer. If she was taller, I'd have her move a little bit farther back. She is a natural athlete, so she ended up in a good spot. She's going to grab onto these handles. I'll pass her one and not the other because I'm not that polite. And then from here, she's going to do a big hip hinge. So the biggest mistake we see people do on a ski is they do an excessively big squat. I want Alyssa to do a little engagement with her shoulder blades, almost like she's deadlifting, and bend her elbows in tighter here. So not that straight down action that she started to do. I want her to get in tight here, and that's kind of the beginning of her pull. And so from there, Alyssa, just do a couple strokes of a ski and we'll start messing with it some. Cool. All right, stop for a second. Awesome. So what Alyssa did is not bad at all. And if you hop on a machine and do that in the gym, you're absolutely going to get a good workout, and no one is going to say like, oh, that guy or girl doesn't know what she's doing. But because Alyssa's my partner for this Hyrox workout coming up in a couple months, I want her to be phenomenal at it. So the first thing I want Alyssa to think about is that the way this machine works, just like all the other Concept 2 erg-based machines, the one that have these flywheel, is we need to get a lot of power coming into that stroke. And so Alyssa's big power range is going to be from roughly here, as she has her elbows tucked, here, down to like right here. After that, she's not able to get a lot of power. So if you watched a minute ago, Alyssa, it appeared like she was really focusing on like this tricep flick at the bottom. Is that accurate, Alyssa?
Yeah.
Cool. That tricep flick at the bottom is really weak. So I don't need you to worry as much about that as I need you to worry about power from here to here. And then anything that happens after that, you can kind of shut down and just relax and kind of finish through. But don't worry about, oh, I need to really flick hard. I think your hips were doing really well, and you weren't getting a lot of like knee bend into the squat. It was more of a hip hinge. That all looked phenomenal. I was really happy with that. Let's try it again, and I want you to really focus on all of the work is from here to here. Do all of your effort right there and just let everything else just kind of flow. So pull harder right there. Yes. Yes. Nice. Really good. Her pace is about 15 seconds faster now, which is phenomenal. Good. Good. Call it. Good. So that looked really good. And the big changes that happened were, one, you put more of an emphasis into the top right there. And two, you didn't bend over quite as far, partially because you weren't as worried about, oh, I need to bottom this thing out. So people, I think, have the misconception that because the rope goes all the way from here down to here, that you need to try to pull that far every time. But really, your power is from right here, once you engage your lats and bend your elbows a little bit, to about right here. And then everything else is just kind of you coasting. Yeah. So all of your work is, how much effort can I put in that area right there? Perfect. Does that make sense?
It does.
Awesome.
Okay, so while we're here on that note, let's pivot for a second on how would you alter that advice for people who are maybe slightly taller than me, like you?
Yep.
For those of you who don't know, I am 5'1", so I'm about as short as they get, which this would be helpful for more petite athletes, but let's kind of make sure we're giving tips for everyone here, because I know most people are statistically taller than me. So how would you potentially adjust that advice for those that are
So for context,
really
I am 6 feet tall. So when Alyssa was standing on the platform, she stood right here with her feet in line with these bars, and this is a pretty standard setup for the Concept 2 machine. The other competitor brands, I'll say, have suspiciously similar designs to the Concept 2, so they will also be set up in a very similar way. The biggest thing is that if you're taller, you can step back more, and then two, you probably would get more benefit from like getting up onto your toes and then coming down than I would. So I get here and I might get onto my toes for the first couple pulls as I'm trying to accelerate it, but then afterwards I get into a nice rhythm of and really the only big difference is that I need to step back a little bit farther to have room, because you were close to hitting your face on this platform, on this monitor. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to step farther back. So as you get taller, you need to step farther back. But the basic mechanics of, hey, I need to reach up tall, I need to engage my shoulder blades, I need to bend my elbows, I need to keep it tight, I need to go down and come back up, all that'll be the same regardless of height.
So then what would your advice be for those who say, I'm coming on here and my issue wasn't my power drive, it was that I was doing the squatty potty, which we see all of the time.
Yes.
So do you have any tips then for the watchers and listeners on how to kind of cue and fix that out? Because I think that's a big mistake I see a lot of people make, which no offense to you guys if you're making that mistake, but I see that a lot with all the release of Hyrox clips and videos of the squat.
So a ton of people squat, and I would say you mentioned it in Hyrox. I think it's especially a big mistake there.
Yeah.
If you are just doing this for the sake of I'm trying to burn 100 calories and I'm not worried about performance, I'm not worried about a race, I think you're being less efficient. Sorry about that. I think you're being less efficient if you squat down, but I don't think it's some like massive issue for you. I just think you're not going to be as good as you would be. The biggest cue I would have is thinking about not bending your knees and basically thinking of it as it is a hip movement and the hips are what are moving, as opposed to it is a knee bend exercise. If you're more familiar with exercise and you know like a hip hinge for a deadlift or a hip hinge for an RDL, there's a reason like we do those movements in the gym. It's like they're a fundamental movement pattern that would then apply to something like this. So cool, let me think about it like an RDL if you have that background. If you don't have that background, just think, hey, I'm pushing my butt back every time.
Yeah, I think the cue that we like, if you guys struggle with this, you know, thinking of that as that RDL type bend, slight at the hip here. Or if not, if you're not as familiar with that or you even struggle with your RDLs, is even think, I know there's the cue that people say, think about if you were gonna shut a door with your butt. Thinking of that rather than bending down to avoid the wall, so to speak. So
perfect.
Yeah.
Exactly that.
Awesome.
Yep, and so the other big thing for me, especially because we're gonna do this for a Hyrox race, is you really don't wanna squat down, because so many of the events in a Hyrox race are really quad burners. So if you and I do this together and you burn out doing, even if it's really fast, but you're squatting down a ton, cool. the moment we hop off here, we have a 1,000-meter run, which will tire out your legs, and then we're gonna go to a sled push, which is a super hard quad workout. Then we have the sled pull, which I think people think of as an upper body thing and like a back exercise, but for most people, it's not. You grab the rope and then you walk backwards, and it's another quad burner. So it's just,
saving the legs is really
if you can
important here.
avoid using your quads on this, you should. And also it's good technique for everybody else.
Yeah, so good technique for everyone. And I think that's important. If you guys are doing CrossFit classes, competing in CrossFit type events or Hyrox type events, or using these even in your group fitness classes, I think they're starting to incorporate more of those. Just some tips for, you know, strategically saving your legs for things and where they fit in workouts can make a big difference. And again, it's not a make or break thing. The form isn't inherently bad, but it's not the most efficient, right? And if you're competing in things, you want it to be as efficient as possible, right? That's making the most of the work that you're producing forward with everything that you're doing.
And I think even if you don't have like big competition goals, if you're a person who does a fitness class, but you don't care about like getting your name on the top of the board, even without all that stuff, knowing how to do it well, I think will make it more enjoyable for you so that you can exercise longer. Like I think you'll just enjoy your time more. And I do think you mentioned that this wasn't a like incredibly popular machine. As someone that owns a couple of gyms, this is one of my absolute favorite machines because it doesn't take up a ton of space and it's super easy to hop people on and off. So if I'm teaching a big group fitness class and I have a rower in there, it takes a while to transition 4 people on and off of a rower. The ski machine, it's literally just, I'm done, hand off, next person goes. And so I think this would be a very useful machine to get good at over the next few years as it becomes more and more popular.
And I will say my tip here is someone who's been working on both my, SkiErg here, but rowing technique specifically is something that I'm working on training as well. And really dialing that in is if you guys are struggling with the ski or any ergs, is don't hesitate to slow down and work on your pools being efficient and effective than just, turning over as fast as you can in the most inefficient way. I think that's a mistake. I think people try to improve their power output or their drive or their form, but then they're just moving very quickly. Sometimes you have to kind of slow it down to really focus on every individual pull or stroke on being like, again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but really thinking about how can I train this to be my natural movement pattern so that when you do move fast and powerfully and are doing that hard, you're still being efficient. Because I find myself, at least with the rower, that when I get tired, I want to go to the lazy pulls that aren't as powerful. I'm not driving as much. I'm just doing a lot of strokes per minute, but they're losing that power that you're getting here specifically in that initial pull.
For sure. And I see that on every erg. The moment people fatigue, they suddenly, I think they get so tired that it's almost like when people are so cold and they're like out in the wilderness, they like start stripping down. Like they're so tired on the machine that they start doing wild stuff. Like I've seen people grab the rowing machine and like try to hold it upside down. And it's like, that can't possibly be better. So a big thing I try to remind myself of and remind other people of is like, hey, when you're tired, that's actually the most important time to have good technique. So, hey, let's learn that good technique. And then when you're fatigued, that's when it matters most that you do it well and you do it efficiently.
And my favorite tip there would be instead of when you're tired, going through and just being like, well, I'm tired, so I'm just gonna go as fast as I can or, get all crazy with my things, is at the end of each stroke, just take a second to pause. Usually that pause is what I find, at least for me, is where I can recollect and then get all that drive through the most powerful part of it and use the energy I do have left to really drive that, reset, take a second. And instead of that constant, because then you start get the, what I did like 2 years ago, I was squatting and I was going like that and that's not the best use of it, so.
That's a really good point. A very common thing you see people do on the ski machine is that butterfly out technique. That wastes energy and you don't need to do that.
I was gonna say, next let's maybe dive into the other things that we see people doing or dissecting the rest of those. So far everyone, to recap, you're pulling here, you're most powerful from your pull, bending in that elbow, kind of think of pulling that elbow towards your body here. And then don't do what I did where I was trying to push in the flick, kind of let your body float through it. And then you're hinging at those hips, you're not squatting down. So right now we've kind of dissected everything from the powerful pull elbows in, kind of coast through the flick. We're bending at the hips, not at the knees. But then we have to get back up to that pull position all over again. So what we're talking about here is not going through, again, powerful pull. That was not great demo.
That's all good.
Coast through here, we're bending at the hips, but what we don't want to do is this butterfly out to the top. What do we want to do instead, Corey?
Instead, you want to go back up the same way you went down. So then just trace that back up. Yep. Almost looks like you're on a rail. You're down and up in the same pattern. Really good, really good. Yep.
So
Perfect.
You're really then thinking kind of, it's almost this constant motion of like you're violining your elbows to your lats kind of the whole time.
Yes. And that lat, that really big, powerful muscle on your back is the big driver here.
Yeah.
And so you can get really fast numbers on this machine because the two big drivers are your lats and hips.
Yeah.
And so I used to make probably the reason you flicked hard is 2 years ago when I coached people on the ski, I would talk about like, oh yeah, it's a great tricep exercise because you finish through there and that's how your tricep works. But honestly, when I do a hard ski workout now, it is my lats and biceps and hips that get tired.
Yeah.
Because those are the big movers that we're trying to use.
For that powerful area
Absolutely.
there. Yeah. Awesome. So to kind of recap everything we covered here today, if you're short, you're going to be a little bit closer to the machine. Again, I'm 5'1" and Corey's 6 foot, so I think that gives a pretty good breadth and depth of the spectrum of height. So you could work your way back based off your comfort there. You back further if you're taller. Again, I'm shorter. When you hold this, the handles will kind of be towards your hand there. I don't really think it really matters if you do it, but it's going to be better if you have that kind of base there at the base of your wrist. Again, pulling down, keeping those elbows close, coasting through that stroke, bending at the hips, and going right back the way that you started. So I think the last thing we have to cover here is kind of figuring out for people where their damper should be based off of their own pace, efficiency, speed, and then kind of guiding them on how they can find that for themselves. Because I think people forget that damper, there's general recommendations for it, but it's going to be unique on you and how powerful you are per pool, height, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. So really good question. So to figure that out for yourself, the general guideline I would give you, and this kind of goes back to what Alyssa was talking about a minute ago about like what to do when you're tired. So there's two ways that you can kind of move quickly on an erg, and that applies to the ski and the row and the bike erg. And when I say erg, I mean like an ergometer, this sort of flywheel-based fitness stuff. You can essentially pull harder, or you can pull more often, or obviously you could do both. And so generally, if you are stronger, it'll probably be beneficial for you to pull harder and less often, because a lot of times, and we're trying to fight that with like all the hybrid training stuff we do, but generally stronger people are less cardiovascularly competent, and vice versa. People that are really good cardiovascular are typically not as strong. So the strong person is probably going to do better with a higher damper and pulling less often, and someone that is not as strong but maybe is stronger cardiovascularly is going to do better with a lower damper setting and then pulling more frequently.
Yeah.
And so I would say as a general rule, you're gonna be somewhere between 5 and 10 on the damper setting for the SkiErg, because honestly below 5, it's so light that it's almost like not going to be a limiting factor. And your strength and your body weight are gonna play into that. So one of our other coaches, Coach Trevor, Dr. Trevor Batson, is about 40 pounds lighter than me. So he, for example, if we're skiing together, wants to be on an 8. He's very strong, but he's just not as heavy as I am. For me, because of I weigh 200 pounds, because I have a lot of body weight, the 10 damper never feels heavy to me.
Yeah.
I never feel like the reason I'm slowing down on a ski machine is because the resistance is too heavy.
Yeah.
Because when I engage here and then drop my hips back, I get so much momentum just from that little move happening where my body weight gets into it that the flywheel starts spinning pretty hard.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I do better with that. So I would say start at a 10 if you've never done it before, just so you can feel some resistance. And then I would just start in that middle range. Start at a 7, somewhere between a 5 and 10, start at a 7. And then if you feel like, hey, I could pull more frequently, but it's too heavy, I would lower it down. And if you think I'm pulling about as frequently as I'm capable of, and the issue is I'm not getting enough out of my pulls, then I would go up.
Yeah. And this happens to me a lot. Specifically, again, I train more on rower, and this is where I'm struggling with that as well, is the recommendations for even mine are, Coach Noah recommended me to be maybe between like a 5-6 in my workouts, but I was having to go to a 6-7 because I was turning over so frequently, but my drive wasn't matching that and my times weren't doing better. And so the great way to do that is looking at the screen here, and of course it'll depend on the distance, pace, and effort that you're doing. You can kind of look at your average split here. It's 500, right? On the ski, just like Israel. It defaults to 500. And what you can do is when you're playing around with that, you can look at your default 500 meter pace and figure out, okay, if I move it up versus down, is that pace going quicker, right? And thinking about your own level of exertion there too. Obviously, if it's going quicker, but you're moving at a higher level of exertion, then maybe that's just the effort that you're putting into it. But I think if you're doing that consistent study, say you're just doing a 7 effort, 7 out of 10, and adjusting it between 5 and 10 and saying, okay, where am I both the perfect blend of powerful, but also turning over in a way where that pace is being lowered, right, in relative to that is probably my best advice and guidance.
Absolutely.
Would you say that too as well?
Absolutely, yep. Okay. And it might change over time.
Yeah.
And it might be that as you row more and more frequently, because I know you got that, I follow Alyssa on Instagram, so I know she got a rower recently. I know that as you get more and more efficient with it, you can eventually lower that damper setting down and still get the same paces out of it.
Yes.
To the point that like you're on a 6 or 7, the like elite rowers are on like a 4.
Yeah.
And they somehow, despite being on a 4, still get these ridiculously efficient pulls. And it's just muscle memory and, no offense to you and your other miniature size followers, a lack of height. So Alyssa,
you know what Regis said to me when I was training
5'1",
the other week? Regis is my husband and Corey's a good friend as well, and he was watching me rowing and he goes, have you considered being taller? It's just a limiter here for us folks.
Yes, it is a useful bit of advice.
It is a useful bit of advice.
When people ask me how to get better at the ski, I was like, if you could just gain 50 pounds and weigh as much as I do, you'd be so much better.
So let's, on that note then, 2 things I want to follow up on before we wrap this up for everyone is advice for finding the damper then for our lighter female followers. So I'm about 140 pounds for context here. We're giving staggered comparisons. Corey's a foot taller and about 60 pounds heavier than me. Corey's a lot better at skiing with me. I've worked out with him before. I can say that with confidence. You're going to pull the team in the Hyrox on the ski, but I'll pull us in the run. Yeah.
So, separate video
of that strategy.
The flaw of how screwed I am.
I know. But with that being said, I think for our lighter females, which I know a lot of you guys following this are probably on that end of the spectrum with me, you might start at that lower end and that be okay. But if you are a little meatball muscle hamster like me and stronger, don't be afraid to tick that up a little higher as well. My lats are probably one of the strongest muscles on my body and my hinging. So for me, that's going to make up a little bit of that difference in my height. If you don't have that, don't be afraid to kind of tinker and start, again, how Corey suggested, but you just might be on that lower end, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just about what's most efficient and effective to you. Would you say that as well?
Absolutely. So for sure, if you are 5'1", 140 pounds, but don't have a 400-pound deadlift in your background, then for sure, I would have started you on a 5.
Yeah.
I just know you and know that you're really strong, and I know you could start up higher and probably do well.
Yeah.
In general, if you can match output at a lower damper setting, you should.
Okay, that's helpful.
As in general, if I could, so like with the paces I would like to pull when we race together, if I could pull those with the damper on a 7, I would rather do that because it would be less taxing.
Yeah.
I just can't pull those paces. Not on a 10.
And that's helpful to hear. And so that ties perfectly into the last bit of advice, I think, for people using ski, whether that's, again, for Hyrox, competing, CrossFit, or just on their own, is how do you approach or give recommendations for adjusting the damper based off the type of workout interval that you're doing, right? Because there's going to be some adjustment on that.
So the longer the interval is, the more your lats are going to burn out, so the lower I would have the damper setting. So, for example, if you asked me to do my fastest possible 100 meter, I would want it on a 10.
Yeah.
Every 500, I would still do a 10 because 500 meters for me is going to be somewhere around 1 minute and 25 seconds. Like, it's not that long. The longer I go, the more I would want to drop it down to, hey, Corey, I need you to do a 10K on here. I would now be on a 7.
Yeah. And I think that's helpful because sometimes when you see these in workouts, you might see maybe sprint interval type training. So maybe a 10, 20, 30 second interval. And for that, you're probably gonna want more power in that pool, especially because you're gonna have less strokes to start getting the fan, the flywheel going. So thinking about shorter intervals, you'll probably bump up a little higher. And then longer intervals, you'll probably go down a little lower. And again, that will depend on you and your pace. And again, how effective you are and your cardiovascular training and background. But that's kind of an easy general rule of thumb for the SkiErg and ergs in general, is if it's short, all out bouts, you're probably going to want more power in each pool versus longer, which makes it more endurance-y in nature, so to speak. Yeah.
And even on that, like the context of the rest of the workout. So like you and I are going to do 1,000-meter ski. We're going to split it up and do some shorter interval, possibly 125 meters. But also it's part of a hour and 20-minute long workout we're doing. So I'm not going to approach that like I'm just doing 125 meters and then being done with the day.
Yeah.
I'm going to approach it like it's 125 meters out of an hour and 20-minute long workout that you and I are going to do
And
together.
I think that's a great last bit of advice for those doing Hyrox. For those of you who don't know, I'm training for my first 3 Hyroxes. Corey has done
5?
6. And he's an official Hyrox coach and is one of the coaches who programmed our Hyrox version 1 and then upcoming version 2 coming in 2025. So for those who are using the ski as part of Hyrox, right? The ski is one of many stations.
Yes.
And it's an hour plus long event for most people. So what's your best advice for approaching the ski? You know, I think you kind of tied into it there, but I really want to drill at home that it's not just a single all out ski. It's a ski as part of a bigger piece.
A couple different things on it. So one, I would say if you are signed up for a Hyrox race and you don't have access to a ski, like Alyssa doesn't have access to a ski, I wouldn't panic that much about not having access to a ski machine or the sled push, for example, when it's one event out of a hour and, if you and I do phenomenal, hour and 10-minute race.
Yeah.
So like this is 4 minutes for us out of 70 minutes.
Yeah.
So if you're not that good at it, it's not something you need to panic about. It would be like my first bit of like advice for it. Second, the SkiErg specifically in the context of a Hyrox race is the second thing. You run 1,000 meters and you get to the ski.
Yeah.
So it is the first event you do. It's the second like fitness activity you do after one 1,000 meter run. And so you see a lot of people come out way too fast on this. As someone who has done a Hyrox race and won the ski, it's not a good idea. The first race I did it with a partner and we won the ski. And I was like,
win everything
this is
else.
great. And then I felt awful. This is a family-friendly YouTube channel, so I lack the vocabulary to tell you how bad I felt after that
Hyrox
moment.
pacing, another video coming soon.
Yes, I felt so bad. And so keeping in mind that like, hey, I'm excited, the race has gone off, I'm in the heat of everything, and you feel great because probably as you're training for this, you're gonna be really fit and you're very excited, and if you haven't done a lot of these races, it is easy to get going, and especially like me, I'm good at the ski. And so you can get going, keeping in mind that you have a lot to go.
Yeah.
And then the way you'd pace it is exactly what you're alluding to. You need to pace it as if, hey, I'm going to finish this and then move on through other events. And that's where like getting with a coach or talking to somebody would be really good, because for me, the events are where I'm really strong. So I kind of 80% effort them so that I can go 100% on the run.
Yeah.
And it might be different for you racing solo where you're a really good runner, but you're not going to be as strong in the machine. It might be that you need to go 100% on the machine, and then you can recover
on the run
and run at the same pace that I'm running with you. So there's a little bit of strategy there of like, what are your strengths and weaknesses?
And shameless plug, if you join us in the list method in our group community, you can ask questions like this to Corey, Trevor, Noah, me, and the rest of the team at any point in time, and we can help you figure out that for you.
And I will spend a ridiculous amount of time answering that question.
Corey will dissect your whole training approach for you. Yeah. So the last thing I'll wrap up here is if you don't want to train a Hyrox, you're not doing CrossFit, you're just a regular person, you have a ski in your gym, you're curious how to use it, I would go back and check out my how to do 3 ways to do zone 2 training video, because the ski is a great way that you can incorporate that into either circuit-based zone 2 easy training. Ski is going to be lower overall intensity, so if you're someone who struggles with getting your heart rate higher or having your heart rate be too high and spiking and you need a lower, kind of intensity way to train in that zone 2 easy passive training, the ski is a great way to mix that into your training. It also is just something different to do. I know if you are struggling with lower body injuries, I use the ski a ton. When I was in a boot a few years ago and had a foot injury, it's also just a really fun thing to mix in. So you're kind of doing a little bit more of an upper body driven cardio mode versus our traditional running or biking that we see a lot, similar with the row. And so don't be afraid to think this is only for elite people, people competing in Hyrox, CrossFit. Like Corey runs a gym that's filled with Gen Pop regular everyday people who are using this as part of their circuit training and cardio. And I think that, like you mentioned, it's really accessible. It's easy for people to use. You can mess up your form and you're still gonna get a good workout out of it. So don't think that we're saying that, you know, if you don't do it perfectly, it's gonna be make or break, but don't be afraid to kind of incorporate this in, play with it, or use it as a way to get in either, you know, zone 2 easy cardio, mixing things in, or really powerful, high output, faster, hard workouts as well. It's a great piece of equipment that can be very versatile within that, and it's accessible if you have it in the spaces that you're using it. So again, you don't need to be doing Hyrox like us or CrossFit like Dr. Trevor, but you can still use this stuff, and it's a fun way to mix up your cardio training.
Awesome.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. If you want to see more content like this, let us know in the comments what you want to learn about Hyrox, cardio training, and or breaking anything down in the gym with me and Coach Corey below. Otherwise, we will catch you guys in the next video, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.